Thank you very much for sticking with us. Sorry, a few minutes late. 5 people to mic up and get going always takes a little bit more time. But we're going to have a very interesting session this early evening. Content in crisis, independent blog or undisclosed advertising. As a print journalist, historically, we've never had an issue with that, we don't think. We might have taken freebies from the travel industry, we reported fairly, we'd like to think. But with digital, it's opened up a whole can of worms. So, content in crisis. Is it in crisis? The UK Competitions and Markets Authority has started to crack down on marketing agencies and bloggers who do not clearly label or identify content so that it is distinguishable from the reasoned and independent opinion of a journalist or blogger. But with so many DMOs and other travel businesses now engaging in content marketing and working with bloggers on a paid basis, is it a cause for concern? This applies not just to bloggers, but to PR agencies, marketing agencies, anybody creating content. Are they staying on the right side of the law? Well, we're very fortunate to have 4 speakers this evening who can help clarify this issue, including from the far left, John Riley, who's the project director of the Competition and Markets Authority, Celia Pontin, investigations executive of the ASA, the Advertising Standards Authority here in the UK. Next to Celia is Alistair Mackenzie, who's the chair of the British Guild of Travel Writers and a very seasoned journalist. And on his left is Sarah Rathbone, the MD of Siren Communications, who can represent the PR side of the business. So I'm going to ask each of them to speak for 3 to 5 minutes on their respective subject so they can explain their function in this discussion. Then we'll have a series of questions, get the slide questionnaire going later, which I'll give you details about, and a debate from the people in the audience. So please, first up, John, can you like to go and present? John is from the Competition and Markets Authority.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's very kind of you. Thank you. Yes, that's right. My name's John Riley, and I lead the CMA's work on online reviews and endorsements. I should probably start by saying a little bit about who the CMA are. We're the UK's competition regulator, and our aim is to make all markets work better for consumers, businesses, and the economy. And we do this by enforcing competition law, by investigating mergers, by reviewing markets that we don't think are working well for consumers. And most relevant here is that we enforce consumer law to prevent businesses from misleading consumers. And over the last 18 months, consumer reviews and online endorsements have been a particular area of focus for our work. And our angle here really is that we're excited about the potential for online word of mouth to help all sorts of sectors work better. So opinions that people read in reviews or in blogs or in vlogs or see in vlogs can help people to compare their options, and they can help people to discover options that they weren't aware of before. So both of those things are hugely important when you're planning a trip, particularly if you're planning a trip to an area you don't know particularly well. Now, our focus as the CMA has been on tackling issues that might get in the way of that process from working well. So practices like fake consumer reviews or unlabeled advertising, those can distort the picture that's presented to consumers, leading to them making the wrong choices and damaging businesses that do play by the rules. And so far, there's kind of been 2 phases to our work here. So we carried out an initial review where we gathered information on how these sectors are working, and we published a report last June setting out a number of areas of concern. And since then, we followed up with some enforcement work aimed at addressing some of those concerns. And so far, we've completed 5 follow-up enforcement cases, and that's included 2 enforcement cases that address unlabeled advertising online. I'll just say a little bit about both those cases. The first was about related to a company called Social Chain. Now, in August, we announced that we'd taken action against Social Chain, who are a marketing company who hold over 50 Twitter accounts some of which have over 1 million followers. And they use those accounts to create what they call thunderclaps. So essentially, they get things to trend on Twitter by arranging a series of tweets and retweets about a subject over a short period of time. And when we investigated Social Chain, we found that they'd arranged promotions for things like films and computer games and dating apps, essentially through their own accounts, but also through 43 other social media personalities' accounts as well. And all of that material read like the independent views of the person who was tweeting, rather than paid for advertising. Now, in the other case that we ran, that was aimed at tackling unlabeled advertising in online magazines and blogs. Now, we announced that piece of work back in April, and that related to a payday loans company called MyJar and 2 marketing companies, Starcom Media and Tan Media. Now, MyJar and Starcom had used Tan Media, who are a content marketing company, to arrange ads on a variety of blogs and other online articles without ensuring that they were properly labelled. So, sort of bringing it all together, we've taken cases and secured undertakings from those businesses to stop those practices from being repeated. And we also hope that the action we'll take will discourage other businesses and other bloggers and other marketing companies from carrying out those sorts of practices as well. And we've also produced some short guidance for businesses and marketing companies so that people are aware of what the law requires of them. And just a couple of points to sum up. We understand that working closely with social media influencers and content providers is one of the most effective ways for businesses to reach their target audience, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as it's clear to the viewer or the reader when they're looking at a paid-for ad, as opposed to somebody's independent view. And just finally, to just finish off, despite the importance of reviews and blogs for consumers when they're planning holidays and trips, we haven't yet taken any enforcement action in this sector. So it's important that these unlawful practices are tackled across the economy. So if people do have intelligence to share with the CMA, either on unlabelled endorsements, fake reviews, or other review sites practices, we'd encourage them to come forward and to share that information with the CMA. Thanks.
Thunderclaps on Twitter, we'll come back to that in a bit. Find out how many of you do a thunderclap a week. It'll be interesting to know. On the Advertising Standards Authority, we have Celia Pontin, who's the investigations executive, who knows John and works with him in the same sort of field, but purely from the advertising side. But I'll leave Celia to explain that more. If you can welcome Celia to the stand, that would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Celia, and I work in the investigations department at the Advertising Standards Authority. Before I talk a little bit about self-regulation and online content marketing, I'd just like to say a couple of words about how our system works. The Committees of Advertising Practice, or CAP, as we call them, write the codes for the advertising industry. They also write guidance, and they enforce the outcomes of ASA investigations. The ASA, the sister organization, takes consumer complaints and investigates them to determine whether a breach of the advertising codes has occurred. I work on the ASA side, but today I'm talking about the system as a whole, so both CAP and the ASA. So when we're talking about online influencer marketing, the CAP code covers it in a very specific way. So this isn't the only way in which online content is covered by the CAP code. We also cover marketers' own websites and banner ads and things like that. But when it comes to influencer marketing, the advertising must satisfy both prongs of this test. There must be some form of payment. That doesn't just have to be money. That can be free trips, items, experiences. And there must also be editorial control retained by the brand. Just like with money, editorial control isn't just giving someone a script and asking them to stick to it. Editorial control can be as tight as that, but it can also be as loose as giving a veto on prohibited content or prohibiting somebody from also having a similar arrangement with a competitor. And I make this point that payment-only models are not regulated by the ASA because they are not considered to be marketing under the CAP code. And that's a really important distinction for us because it helps to distinguish when something is marketing and when something is sponsorship. There's been a lot of talk about people labeling content. So why should people be using labels? Well, Rule 2.1 of the CAP code says that marcoms must be obviously identifiable as such, and the key word there is obviously. A lot of ads are very clearly ads from the context. If you look at a billboard, you know it's an ad, and it doesn't have to carry a label. But with advertorial, the distinction is somewhat more blurred. The point of advertorials is that they are editorial in nature, and that they appear in the same kind of space. So usually, they are not clearly identifiable as ads, and for those, labels need to be used. And the reason that I made the point about payment-only models not being regulated by the ASA is that labels such as sponsored are potentially problematic from our point of view, because if you are labeling an ad as a piece of sponsored content, you're labeling it as something different. These two words have two different meanings, and so we've recently released some guidance on this issue that you can find. It's been recently tweeted on our Twitter feed, and it's also on the CAP website. We think, obviously, that compliance with the CAP codes is very important. And part of the reason for that is that consumers need to know that something is an ad. If a consumer engages with some content because they think it's editorial, because they don't realize that it's advertising, that's a problem under the CAP codes. But it's not just the CAP codes. Many of our code rules are actually derived from the consumer protection regulations, including this particular issue. So this isn't just an issue for self-regulation, it's an issue across the board and for consumer protection. The ASA and CAP are working on awareness. Part of that is attending events like this and releasing guidance. But brands and publishers also need to be aware of their responsibilities. If they're not, non-compliance runs a couple of risks. Aside from enhanced sanctions from the ASA, there can be negative publicity, both for the brand and for the influencer who's publishing the content. But also there can be damaged consumer trust. And that consumer trust isn't just damage for the brand and the publisher, it's damage for the ad model as a whole. The fastest way to get consumers to cease engaging with native and influencer content is to make them trust whether it's really advertising or whether it's editorial. We've seen research to show that consumers are fully happy to engage with content, but if they then find out that it's advertorial, that's when their trust is damaged. So I'd like to leave you with 3 key points for social media advertising. The first is that when an ad is in remit, and this is across any form of media, the CAP code applies in full. That means substantiation for claims, that means responsibility in targeting, and that means social responsibility insofar as age-restricted products are concerned, as well as everything to do with recognition of marcoms. So whether an ad is obviously identifiable isn't the only issue here. Secondly, when brands are doing influencer and content marketing, they need to be clear where the editorial control lies and whether they're retaining any of it. For us, this determines whether something is sponsored and therefore lies outside of the CAP code, or whether it's advertorial and is something we will take action over. And finally, if the commercial intent isn't clear from the context, ads need to be labeled appropriately. And a quick piece of marketing of my own, the CAP Copy Advice team offer free guidance on an ad hoc basis, and any marketers or publishers or media owners can contact them. And we always recommend that when in doubt, people contact that team. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's 2 views. Quite a dense subject, it would appear, not at all cut and dried. So I'm going to rely on Alistair Mackenzie to throw some light on this subject, but from the blogger and the journalist perspective, or a creator of content. Put your hands together, please, for Alistair Mackenzie.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm as Steve always says, I'm a reformed traditional journalist and now a blogger, and I'm also chairman of the British Guild of Travel Writers. I'm going to be very quick here, and it's not just because Scary Steve says he'll shut me off if I talk for more than 5 minutes. It's because I'm just going to go through some figures, because I wanted to put the case that I think that most professional bloggers and digital influencers are actually getting it right, but I wanted to back that up. So I thought I would actually do a quick survey of my colleagues. If I press the button, you will see the first question in it. This went out to on Facebook, on a whole bunch of different groups. And the reason I'm saying I'm going to go through it quickly is that the numbers are very small. I got 61 replies back as of last week, so don't take any serious thing from this. So question one was, what kind of person are you? What do you think of yourself as? It was mostly bloggers who replied. There's some YouTubers in there and the like. Disclosure. So how up to speed do you think you are on disclosure rules? I know nothing, or I'm an expert, and if you weren't an expert, then frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, or are you absolutely terrified? You need to be concerned. So the answers there, I think, were quite pleasing. Most bloggers think they have a good handle on all of this, and they still are not complacent about it, because as you can see there, the bulge is in the middle. They still think they ought to be very aware of what's going on and learn more. When it comes to the blogs themselves, do you declare a sponsored post, yes or no? When do you declare a sponsored, when you do declare a sponsored post, do you explain the arrangement actually in detail, or do you just put in a stock phrase? And where do you put that declaration? Do you put it at the top of the blog? Do you put it down the bottom, somewhere in the middle, or elsewhere? And what we got there was, yeah, I think that's a quite pleasing figure. Actually, I can't read it here from my glasses. But yeah, we got 88% bloggers do declare sponsored posts. And by sponsored posts, I did set it up beforehand and say, I mean anything, any gift that you were given, or flights, any help, anything like that. It doesn't have to be actually a paid gig. Do you declare a sponsored post, or where do you declare it? The majority do it at the majority of them actually use a stock phrase, interestingly. The last one back down there was, where do you do it? The majority do it at the bottom. On videos, do you always declare sponsored videos? And if so, where? Do you voice them on the video? Do you put them actually on screen as a piece of text, or do you put it, if it's on YouTube, do you put it in the explanation or in the body of your blog that you're putting it into? Yes, exactly. Do you do it in text or whatever? And the answers there were that not quite as many as the bloggers, but they said for the most part they do declare, and they declare mostly. A lot of them do it voiced, but I think most of them tend to just do it in text on screen, and they do it right at the top, which I think is a really healthy thing, and I think you guys would approve of. On social media, it starts to get more interesting. On Twitter, Twitter chat, Snapchat, Instagram, Pinterest, G+, and Facebook. When you do disclose a commercial relationship using either spawn or paid or ad or similar, the nevers or not applicable are actually the biggest answers there. You'll see sometimes, often, or always, and what we got was here. Rather interesting on Twitter. As I say, the blue never do it, but sometimes it's not applicable anyway. But on Twitter and Twitter chats, you can see there's a certain amount of yes, I always do, or sometimes. And then it gets to Snapchat. Nobody thinks about doing it on Snapchat. On Instagram, they tend to, but on Pinterest, nobody thinks about it. And at the end of that screen, when you scroll across, you can see on Facebook, everybody thinks about it. On Google+, nobody does. So that's it. That's the quick background to the way that bloggers work and think about it. I think bloggers on the whole do very well, and I think that it's been ironic that we've seen bloggers sometimes being criticized for not making it clear that they're taking sponsored trips and things like that. And actually it has been in the past and still is today paid media who are probably traditional media who are probably a lot worse. So that's it. I can talk about the rest when we get into questions.
Lots of good figures there, and thanks for doing that research off your own initiative. Interesting to see that bloggers tend to treat sponsored, paid, and ads as the same, but that's something we'll explore shortly. In the meantime, we have Sarah Rathbone, who will be our fourth speaker. She runs Siren Communications, who are a sponsor of ours and a very fine sponsor. We've worked with her for 5 years at World Travel Market, who sits in the middle. She has obviously brands and clients, and she also has bloggers on both sides, and possibly has to work in the middle of both. So Sarah, would you like to give your 2 bob worth, and we'll have a chat afterwards. Thank you. Sarah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So yeah, I come at this from the PR space. What we do is work with brands to aid them in driving engagement. Just like in the traditional world, the old order, if you like, we have to have something great to work with, great to share. The challenge has always been, in the old days, if you like, that the risk is the journalists may not agree with you, may share a different opinion, or they might say something that you don't like. Being frank, one of the reasons that paid-for online content has grown is that it allows brands to have a little bit more control. It mitigates a bit of risk, if you like. So I'm going to talk a bit about the brand side of things. So for audiences, if there isn't clarity, so if you don't know if the peer is making a genuine recommendation or if they've been paid to deliver that kind of native advertising or paid-for content, then this leads to big trust challenges. Celia mentioned this a little bit earlier before me. And that's a big, big issue to a brand because you run a risk of losing authenticity and credibility. The most common objective for brands when it comes to online content is to achieve sharing, to achieve engagement. And this rightly encompasses a mixture of both paid for and editorial. Speaking really, really generally, when it comes to online influencers, often the larger they are, the larger their reach, the more likely you are to encounter a kind of paid-for relationship. The cost conundrum there for a brand is a feeling that you need to pay to achieve a certain metric, a certain reach. But if all of the content from that particular feed, blog, social platform, whatever, is always paid for, then at times you do have to question, does it bring you genuine insight? If it's not an act of passion from that content creator, then it might just be wallpaper. And if that content creator doesn't disclose currently to their audience that some of their content is paid for, then you have a risk that at some point the audience finds that out and feels like they've been cheated. And turning off an audience is an absolute no-no for a brand. One of the joys of working in the PR profession is its creativity, coming up with great ideas that get noticed. Brands may worry at times that going down just a paid-for route could mean that creativity gets lost. Now, the advertising sector tells us that that is absolutely not a worry at all. But it shouldn't just be that those with deep pockets achieve or have the room to do really, really well. In PR, a big part of our job is reputation management, ensuring that the brands, the businesses that we work with behave ethically. It's a major consideration for any business. So as a brand, you might fully understand your kind of what you have to do that's right and wrong in terms of what's paid for, where the editorial boundaries are. But you need to know that you're working with an online influencer that understands that as well, and that they aid your audience in understanding that. Brands also have to be hugely agile. Audiences don't mind paid-for content at all within social channels, but that may change. As greater transparency comes, that will have to drive online influencers to declare more and more what is paid for. Audiences could be faced with realizing that content that they thought was genuine is maybe not. And so what works today may not work in the future. We have to be able to evolve. Looking at this from an audience point of view, as consumers, we trust media channels, we have online influencers that we respect, that we listen to, and paid for doesn't mean bad. When things are properly signposted, it allows us to see things in context. A review should be warts and all, it should be a genuine experience. But if what we're reading, what we're seeing is just tomes of kind of ecstatic delight, that's great as long as it's realistic and that's true. Trust isn't just the issue of brands. Audiences have to have trust in the online influencers too. A lack of clarity over what's paid for and what's not could mean that as a consumer, I lose confidence in an online influencer that I may follow or trust. And this is no good either, because brands don't want to work with influencers who are not highly regarded or not highly, pressed the wrong slide, never mind, who are not highly regarded or highly respected. It completely defeats the object of the work. And as an audience, you could argue that our expectations of online influencers when it comes to trust are actually higher than they are for brands. We love to mistrust brands, and we expect our influencer friends to set us right. Audiences can see when content jars or doesn't work as match the high standards that it should. And if we see the same posts over and over and over again in different feeds in different places, well, we get content fatigue, and there's no excitement and no cut-through in that. Audiences want to know that they're seeing something because it's genuinely brilliant, not just because someone paid to have it there. Thankfully, audiences vote with their feet, and this forces quality to lead the way. And getting it righter is better for everyone. For brands to be heard loud and clear, for example, using their content above an ad hashtag, takes some doing, and this makes brands work harder. The influencers they work with also have to be accurate and be honest and deliver results. And greater transparency means greater credibility. And credibility, as any marketeer in the room will tell you, is the holy grail of brand values. Getting it right means that we are all winners.
Thank you very much indeed. An awful lot to cover in a short space of time. I'd like to go straight to our experts on the right. Just to clarify this, payment only is not covered by the ASA. So if somebody's paid for to do something, that's absolutely fine, as long as they're not being their words being used to promote something which is endorsing something.
So a payment-only model is defined by the CAP code as a sponsorship arrangement. And the CAP code specifically excludes sponsorship arrangements from the remit of the code. And so if there is a payment-only model, the ASA is not entitled to regulate that. Okay. However, the CMA is. So it's not some kind of get-out-of-jail-free card. Yeah.
But essentially, people must know if it's an ad or not. This really is the line, it's the bottom line on all of this. And you've quoted some companies, John, that have been prosecuted for clearly Twitter blasting and saying this is all done. I agree by these people, and it clearly isn't. But no travel company so far. Do you think travel is liable to have this type of attitude or this type of crossing over the line?
I mean, I wouldn't expect the travel industry to behave hugely differently from any other industry. I mean, so far our cases have been led primarily by, I mean, we're a regulator, so they're primarily led by where the evidence lies and where we think we can have a benefit on behalf of consumers. Now, the cases that we've run are cases where we've basically received intelligence and we've been able to act. So that it might sound like a bit of a cop-out, but until we have the evidence there, we tend not to look at a sector.
A question that's already come up on Slido.com. If you go to Slido.com, look for the WTM London hashtag and identify the global theatre. The question here, let's put it simply, if you provide a product or experience for review purposes, does this need to be identified in the resulting content? Again, Celia or John.
So, well, just from the ASA's perspective, if it's given for an honest review, and the brand isn't saying you must talk positively, you must mention these features, etc., then for us it wouldn't be marketing covered by the code. So in that instance, for us it doesn't need to be labelled in any specific way.
I mean, from our perspective, my mic working? Yeah. Oh yeah. From our perspective, essentially the position is that if you've received a payment, whether that's a payment in cash or a gift, in exchange for discussing a product or a service, no matter what it is you plan to say, if you've received a payment for in exchange for discussing a product or a service, then you need to make your audience aware of that. Okay. That's our position.
Now Google, of course, was with the Panda 0.4. Google issued guidelines to bloggers. Alistair, you'll know about this.
Yes, but I mean, Google's interests are in, in SEO. I mean, they're not playing the same sort of role that John is here, for example. And interestingly, these guys are, they're the regulators, and what they're interested in is the actual, in effect, the contract. So by and large, for bloggers out there, even pro bloggers, they're not after them so much. I mean, if somebody falls foul of it, and notably we had with the ASA in 2014, the Oreo business, where a bunch of YouTubers were being paid to sponsor Oreo and didn't make the required declarations, and it's Oreo who have to deal with that. It's not the YouTubers so much. I mean, they had to make some corrections if they wanted to keep it up. But so you're kind of interested in the initiator of the contract. With pro bloggers in particular, they're very, very aware of this and have already kind of addressed it and set it out. Back in 2010, thereabouts, Rysen Blogger Collective, the German bloggers, put together a code of ethics. And in amongst that code of ethics, it makes it very clear that we will always write our own opinion, and we will say that on our posts. It was taken up by the Social Travel Summit, and if you're a blogger, you can download it. It's a Creative Commons document and tweak it to yourself. And it actually says, if I put my glasses on, it actually says on my content, see, I always clearly label any advertising, advertorial, sponsorships, competitions, product tests, or third-party reviews published by me and declare any commercial relationships. And these are ones that you can do just as a blogger, but very interestingly, there's a new initiative that's come out of Finland called Ping Ethics, and that's P-I-N-G, and what they're seeking to do is actually marry up both sides of the equation, brands and digital influencers, so they both work by the same kind of code, and this sort of thing will be in it. But it basically falls down to treat as you would like to be treated as a consumer.
And that's true of all consumer behavior in advertising as well. You're clearly going for the overt stuff, and the agency you wrap down quite rightly because it's exploding content out there. But is it the agencies and the middle people rather than the individual bloggers you're looking to control, if you like, and not
That's a really interesting question. I mean, we've done 2 enforcement pieces of work, and the first one that we did that was actually about a payday loans company. We wanted to set an example by taking action against the payday loans company themselves, the marketing company that had arranged things for them, and the content marketing company. So we wanted to, essentially send out a message to each level of the supply chain. What we've done with Social Chain is slightly different because they were a publisher as well. They were publishing tweets as well as arranging these kind of disclosures by other third parties. So what we've essentially tried to do is send out a clear message at every level of the supply chain. But I mean, essentially, I think the point made earlier was right. The business has got to take responsibility here ultimately for what their marketing companies are doing and what bloggers are writing on their behalf. They need to issue clear instructions, and they need to be checking the content. And they and ultimately, I mean, I imagine in many cases, people might move on. They've got to ensure that staff have the right training to ensure they're aware of the rules.
That's where you come in, Sarah. You represent the brands and the bloggers in many cases. So are you the person who really should be arbitrating? Do you think making sure that both sides of the subject, if you like, are happy with it? Should you introduce contracts for your brands and bloggers to make sure this whole area is covered? Follow possibly the Rise Blogger collective as an agreement. Have you had this issue come up before? Do you think you need to do more?
I think as a sector, I think we all could do more, definitely. I think as an agency, you are there to consult and advise. I think the challenge for any kind of agency or marketeer in that position is that the client or the blogger may not take your advice on board. And I think there comes a point then when it's maybe a bit of a difficult conversation as to what you will and won't support them with moving forward. And that's important. And I think sessions like today should be about giving people confidence to have those conversations. In terms of the kind of training side, having contracts in play, I think that's something that is quite new. It's something we've all started to say, this is, if we're paying for something, this is what we absolutely expect in return. And some of that is just about, as Alistair said, being kind of good, treat as you like to be treated. It's about ethics and just doing the right thing. I think there's definitely huge room for improvement, though, and on clarity on all sides.
Okay.
It's very important to recognise that bloggers and influencers are a different breed from traditional journalists, because it was their publishers who, in effect, set up the rules under which they operated, and they were editorially independent, Woodward and Bernstein. So, but with bloggers, with influencers, they live with their audiences. They have a one-on-one relationship with every member of their audience. So there's no way on this planet that they want to somehow deceive them, because that would shatter that thing. And Sarah said something very interesting earlier on about having to keep up with the times, because you guys have your work cut out with the new stuff that we're doing. So that when we were talking just earlier about Facebook and 360 and all the rest of it. So when people start using 360 for things like interviews and stuff like that, or just as a still image, I've done two in the last day. Where do you put that? Where do you put the thing that says, actually, I was paid to be here and to make this 360-degree thing?
Yeah.
So there's it keeps moving on, and we're going to have to keep catching up with it.
Yeah, you say, and I agree with that. 85% of your bloggers on the questions said they do declare sponsored posts at the bottom, and it's quite the standard thing. That's what newspapers used to do. We accepted this freebie for this. That's a disclosure. You said you're counselled against sponsored, using the word sponsored. Is that really important, or is it just a bit of caution against that particular word?
So there are ASA council rulings that discuss why sponsored is advised against. And what it boils down to is a sponsorship arrangement means there is payment from the brand. But advertising and advertorial, which is what we cover, means that there is also editorial control. And there is a fundamental difference in how consumers are going to interpret that piece of content. So if you know that a brand has given somebody an item or sent somebody on a trip in exchange for their honest review, you know how you're going to filter that piece of content as a sponsorship arrangement. But if you know that they have been sent on that trip and that they have been asked to put across key messages, or they've been asked to cover specific things positively, again, that's going to colour how you see that. Brilliant. And so we are clear that brands and publishers, the influencers, need to be using accurate labels.
Okay. And that latter isn't happening.
No, it isn't. But I would recommend all of you to pick up, we've got some printed copies here of John and Celia's presentations, which allow you to climb right inside that minutiae of what we're discussing here. But there's a couple of questions that have come in I'd like to ask. And I thought this is a really interesting one. And I've seen this before, a video blogger, who is being paid for by a coffee company, holding a coffee cup with a logo on it in her video while she's on the road, ostensibly in the Gobi Desert. And the question is, if a video includes a gifted experience, should we tick the box to declare it on YouTube as contains an advert? Now, this is quite a specific one to do, but if a video does contain clearly an advert, should it be recognized as such in some connotation at the end of the video?
So,
yes or no?
Depends on the coffee.
Well, it would depend for us on that relationship between the brands. So if somebody has been paid specifically to hold a coffee cup with a brand logo, we would consider that that is advertising.
Okay.
There are a range of ways in which that could be made clear. If the entire video is a piece of advertising, it needs to be clear before people start watching that video.
No, it's just a part. It's like films with what do they use?
Product placement.
Product placement, exactly that.
So this is something that we haven't got a formal ruling on, but CAP have released guidance on. When it comes to product placement, if the surrounding content is all editorially independent and it's just that product placement, then the fact of that does need to be made clear in the video, but not necessarily before people start watching it. So as long as somebody, they might want to put ad or product placement as a caption or as a soundbite or just something so that people know when that starts that is product placement.
All right, that could be a test case of travel. Watch out. Now, we could carry on, obviously, all evening, because it's a fascinating subject, I think it is. We don't have the time to do that, but I do encourage you to talk to these people on the side after we finish and to pick up some literature. And in the meantime, do give a hand, please, to 4 people who've helped us out tremendously this evening. Thank you. Thanks, guys.